I came home on a cold Friday evening in November. Maple leaves were scattered all over the yard, and I saw my wife Sarah standing frozen by the gate with a small plastic grocery bag in her hand. She wasn't crying, but the way her shoulders trembled told me everything was already over. My name is William. I'm 63 years old. I've worked as a construction contractor here in Niagara for 32 years, and if there's one thing concrete has taught me, it's this: the foundation is the one thing you must never get wrong. If the foundation cracks, the whole house will collapse, no matter how beautifully you paint the walls. I've always been proud of being a decent tradesman, the man who arrives first, leaves last, and always leaves things better than he found them. But sometimes life throws a flawed blueprint right in your face, inside your own home. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a drink, maybe a snack, sit back and get comfortable. And remember, the people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. You'll always be served the best stories here. The house on Fernwood Crescent isn't just a pile of bricks and lumber. I poured every batch of concrete for those front steps with my own hands. I chose every plank of oak myself, planing them down until they were smooth as silk so Sarah would never get a splinter in her hand. That house holds my soul. It was her fortress. But that afternoon when I stepped out of the truck, the cold air from Niagara Falls seemed to sink straight into my bones. Sarah looked at me, her eyes unfocused. "William," Luke said. "He said we can't live here anymore." She whispered, her voice shaking. My chest tightened like a vice had clamped around it. Why hadn't she called me? Why was she standing here like a stranger on her own property? It turns out our only son Luke, a slick real estate broker always dressed in expensive suits, had already planned everything. He showed up while I was away and used that smooth salesman's tongue to twist his mother's mind around. He took her phone, claiming he needed to check the contacts to call a lawyer for help, but in truth he was isolating her completely. Then he dumped stacks of paperwork full of legal jargon in front of her, threatening that the house was in serious trouble, and the only way to protect us was for her to leave immediately so he could handle the situation. Seeing my wife standing there clutching that cheap plastic bag while the warm lights of our home still glowed behind the windows we'd lit for 30 years, a cold current ran down my spine. I didn't shout. A good contractor never panics when he sees a crack. He finds the cause and prepares the tools to tear it out at the root. In that moment, everything inside me hardened like a block of high-grade concrete. Luke thought he could use the law of the jungle to steal the foundation of our lives. But he forgot one thing. I was the man who built this house, and I know exactly where to place the charges to bring down everything rotten inside it. I looked straight into Sarah's eyes and guided her across the stone steps I had polished myself 20 years ago. She was still trembling, the kind of tremble that comes from someone whose greatest trust in life has just been betrayed. I led her inside and set the little grocery bag on the kitchen table, the same table where Luke once sat doing his homework, the same place where he blew out the candles on his 10th birthday. Calmly, I poured a glass of warm water, handed it to my wife, and said in a low but firm voice, "Sit down right here. Drink the water, have a piece of lemon cake. I'm not going anywhere. This is our home. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's a retired elementary school teacher, the kind of person who brightens a room the moment she walks into it. She can spend hours watching the sparrows outside the window and tell me about the personality of each one, as if they were students in her class. Sarah has always been the heart of this house. I've only ever been the bones that hold it up. And now the son she once treasured like a priceless gift had the cruelty to squeeze that heart just because of the numbers on his real estate charts. Luke is a successful real estate broker in Hamilton. He has the smile of a man who could sell you a burning house for the price of a palace. I used to be proud of his resourcefulness until I realized that resourcefulness came without the backbone of an honest man. He knows how to make the wrong thing sound reasonable. He knows how to use an old person's fear of becoming irrelevant to manipulate them. And standing beside him is Mia, his wife. If Luke is the executioner, then Mia is the scriptwriter. She's always complained that this house is too big, too old, and full of legal risks every time the family gathers. She looks at the tiny cracks in the walls. The ones I know perfectly well come from the natural movement of wood, as if they were signs of an impending structural collapse. Throughout the past summer, Luke's phone calls slowly stopped being about our health and turned into inspections. "Dad, do you still have the original title deed? Mom, property taxes in this area have been rising lately. Let me check the paperwork for you." Back then, I thought he was simply worried about our old age. I was wrong. I had allowed a termite to crawl into the foundation without even noticing. That day, while I was across town helping Terrence move some excavators, Luke and Mia showed up. They didn't bring flowers. They didn't bring gifts. They brought a stack of documents and a level of shamelessness I had never imagined possible. They told Sarah that I was in financial trouble with my contracting partners, that the house was about to be seized, and that if she didn't sign the temporary authorization papers, we would lose everything. They even warned her that the police would arrive the next morning to seal the doors. Sarah, who has never lied in her life and never once believed her own child could lie to her, completely collapsed under the pressure. Even more despicable, Luke took her phone. He pretended he needed to install some security software, but in reality he powered it off and hid it so she couldn't call me or anyone else. He said the kindest thing for everyone was that I should take what I need and stay somewhere else until everything is sorted out. Sarah repeated Luke's words, her voice breaking. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the cabinets I had built with my own hands. Disgust rose up my throat like acid. The boy I had once taught how to hold a hammer, how to measure a line so it would be perfectly straight, was now using that same precision to stab his parents in the back. He thought he was clever. He thought he understood property law better than a contractor who had worked with building codes and ownership regulations for more than 3 decades. If you've listened this far, do me a small favor before we continue the story. Tell me where you're watching this video from. I'd really like to know how far this story has traveled. Thank you. I placed my rough hand on Sarah's shoulder. Under the weight of my palm, I could feel her heartbeat slowly beginning to steady again. A builder knows that when a structure is damaged, the first thing you do isn't scream at the rubble, you shore it up so it doesn't collapse any further. Let me handle it, Sarah, I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. We're not going anywhere. Tonight we're sleeping in our own bedroom, and tomorrow Luke is going to learn the most important lesson about building. You never build wealth on the suffering of your parents, because a foundation like that will eventually sink. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I reached a name I had hoped I would never have to call in circumstances like this: Margaret Voss. Margaret isn't just a lawyer. She's a hunter in the world of real estate law. And if Luke wanted to use the law as a weapon, I was about to show him what heavy artillery looked like. I looked out the window. Night had settled over Niagara. The streetlights cast a glow over the maple leaves, turning them a deep red like blood. I didn't feel fear. What I felt was a cold, steady determination. Luke had made a fatal mistake. He thought that because I was getting older, I had grown soft. What he didn't understand is that concrete only gets stronger with time. And I, William, would be the hardest block of concrete he had ever run into in his life. I stood up and checked the lock on the front door one more time. The sharp click of the bolt echoed through the quiet house. It sounded like the beginning of something. A counterattack with no room for mercy. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rises over the falls, Luke will realize that the grocery bag he handed his mother is the same bag he'll need to pack up the ruins of his own life and reputation. A father's revenge is never impulsive. It is a careful construction process, brick by brick, until the enemy is trapped inside the very cage they built for themselves. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the old leather armchair in the living room, watching clouds drift past the moonlight, pouring through the window. Sarah had finally fallen asleep after drinking a little herbal tea, but even in her sleep her brow was still furrowed. I looked at her hands, the hands that had held chalk and written on classroom boards for 30 years. Now the fingers were thin and pale. Suddenly I remembered the summer of 1998. Luke was 10 years old then. I was building him a small wooden playhouse in the backyard. The boy sat on a pile of sand, wide-eyed, watching me saw through a plank of wood. I took his hand and showed him how to hold the saw properly, how to keep the blade square. Son, I told him, wood can bend, but your measuring line must always stay straight. If you lie to the ruler, the house will punish you. Back then, he looked at me with pure admiration and promised he would grow up to be an honest man like his father. And now, when did the ruler inside his heart start to rot? The pain didn't come from the thought of losing the house. A house can be rebuilt. Bricks and lumber can be replaced. But betrayal from your own blood is like discovering that the main support beam of your home has been eaten hollow by termites from the inside. Rotten, foul, and collapsing the moment you need it most. Luke wasn't just my son. He was the most important project of my life. I invested everything in him: tuition, for the best schools, summers by the lake, and every lesson about integrity that I believed had seeped deep into his bones. But watching the way he treated his mother that afternoon, I realized something I had never wanted to admit. Somewhere along the way, I failed to pour the foundation of my son's character, Luke, and Mia, the woman he calls his wife. I remember the way Mia looked at Sarah's collection of porcelain plates. There wasn't a trace of affection in her eyes, only appraisal. She didn't see a family's memories. She saw objects that needed to be cleared out so this place could become a potential investment property. Their greed had no bottom. It was as cold as the surface of Niagara Falls in the middle of winter. How does a child who once sobbed when he saw a baby bird fall from its nest grow into a man who can stand in the kitchen watching his mother tremble while packing her things into a cheap grocery bag without blinking? He called it for the good of the family. He dressed it up with elegant phrases like asset optimization and elderly risk management to disguise what was nothing more than outright robbery. The more I thought about it, the tighter my chest felt. A slow-burning anger like hot coals began to glow in my chest. I wasn't furious because he wanted money. I was furious because he had stolen the peace of his mother's final years. Sarah never asked for much. All she ever wanted was to grow old beside her rose bushes, listen to birds sing in the morning, and welcome her grandchildren on Sunday afternoons. Luke shattered that simple dream with a stack of fraudulent paperwork and a heart made of stone. Their shamelessness made me sick. A few months ago during dinner, Mia had said, "You know, at your age, managing a property this large is really too much. It's a burden." A burden. The real burden is carrying a filthy soul for the rest of your life, not caring for a home that's filled with love. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. The grocery bag was still there. I opened it. Inside was a wool scarf I had given Sarah on our 25th wedding anniversary, a small photo frame of the whole family back when Luke was still a boy, and a few packets of flower seeds. That was all. In her panic and heartbreak, that was everything Sarah had managed to grab before her own son forced her out the door. Looking at those pitiful belongings, tears almost rose to my eyes. A woman who spent her entire life building a home was allowed to take nothing more than a plastic bag. Luke, you made a mistake. You think you understand the value of land because you're a real estate broker, but you understand nothing about the value of a home. You think your father is old now, his hands shaking, too weak to hold a hammer. But I'm about to show you something. An old contractor defending his family is a far more dangerous man than you could ever imagine. You used legal jargon to deceive your mother. So I'll use real justice to crush you. I won't just take this house back. I'll take back the dignity you trampled into the dirt. That night I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Luke, but to myself. In that letter I made a promise. When the sun rose, everything would be different. I would no longer be the patient, forgiving father. I would be a contractor, inspecting a defective structure, and I would not hesitate to demolish the part of the architecture that had completely rotted away, even if that part bore the name of my only son. I looked out toward the porch, where the concrete steps still stood solid under the moonlight. They never lied. They never betrayed the man who had built them. Sometimes I wished I had cast my son out of high-grade concrete instead of letting him grow up with a soul full of cracks carved by ambition. The silence in the house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath before a battle. So was I. I could feel the hot blood moving through my veins, the calm focus of a craftsman just before beginning a major renovation. Tomorrow morning Luke would see me standing at the door, not with a grocery bag but with a verdict he would never escape. The sweetest revenge is not violence. It is letting the traitor realize that they lost everything at the exact moment they believed they had won. If Luke's actions make you as angry as they make me take just 1 second, hit the like button and share this story. Your support helps stories of justice like this continue to spread so people like William and Sarah never feel alone in the fight to protect their home. I turned off the living room lights. In the darkness, my eyes were still burning. I would take everything back, every brick, every memory, and even Sarah's smile. Failure was not an option. The foundation of this family had to be cleansed of the seeds of betrayal. Luke, tomorrow you will learn what the fury of a true builder looks like. I stood there in the darkness of the kitchen, staring at the old clock on the wall as it ticked toward 5 in the morning. In construction, 5 o'clock is when we prepare the first concrete pour of the day, the moment when the silence of the world allows you to hear every crack in the material. Sarah woke up. She walked into the kitchen with swollen eyes, though she seemed a little steadier now. She looked at me, then at the grocery bag still sitting alone on the table. Softly she asked William, "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slowly brewed a pot of tea. The sharp scent of ginger rose into the air, pushing away the heavy darkness left over from the previous evening. I slid a cup toward her and spoke in a voice as calm as a perfectly still lake. "I'm going to repair the foundation of this house, Sarah. Termites have gotten into it. And you know me. I never accept a structure with flaws." My calm wasn't indifference. It was the calm of an engineer who has already identified the critical weakness in a structure. I picked up my phone and called Margaret Voss the moment the clock struck 6. Margaret answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, alert, like a judge delivering a verdict. "William, I've reviewed the files you emailed me at 3 this morning. Your boy Luke, he's crossed a line. What he's done isn't just unethical, it's a systematic attempt at property fraud." "I want him to learn a lesson, Margaret," I said, gripping the arm of the chair. "Not a warning. A lesson. I want him to understand that this house was built with sweat, not with lies." "Don't worry," Margaret replied. I could hear the rapid clicking of a keyboard on her end. "I've already prepared a formal trespass notice and a fraud complaint. By 8 this morning, your son will see his shiny real estate world collapse faster than a building without steel reinforcement." After that call, I dialed Terrence, my closest friend, a rough, grease-stained mechanic with a heart of gold. "Terrence, I need you. Not your excavator. I need a witness. Be here at 8. "I get it, William," he said. "I'll bring a big thermos of coffee. Let's watch those vultures break their wings." 8:15 a.m. Luke's white Audi rolled into the driveway. He stepped out wearing his navy suit, hair perfectly slicked back, that same confident expression on his face. Mia followed behind him, holding an iPad, her eyes drifting up toward the roof as if she were already calculating which shingles to replace to increase the resale value. They walked straight into the house without knocking. That was their first mistake. They entered like people who already believed they owned the place. "Dad, Mom, why are you still here?" Luke said, his voice dripping with the false politeness of someone pretending to offer charity. "I told you the house needs to be sealed while the legal issues are sorted out. Mia already found a nice serviced apartment in Hamilton for you." I sat at the kitchen table holding a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. I didn't look at him. I looked at Sarah's grocery bag, the one I had deliberately placed in the middle of the table. "Luke," I said quietly, my voice heavy and low, "do you know why I always use the highest grade concrete on every job I build?" Luke frowned, clearly losing patience. "Dad, here we go again with the construction lectures. We're talking about your future here." Because I cut him off, lifting my eyes to meet the gray ones of my son. "Cheap materials can fool the eye at first, but time and pressure reveal everything. You, Luke, are a cheap material your father once mistook for good steel." Luke's face hardened instantly. Mia stepped forward, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. "Dad, that's enough. Luke is only trying to do what's best for everyone. If you don't cooperate, we'll be forced to take stronger measures." Right then, a knock echoed through the house. Sharp. Decisive. A man in a court officer's uniform stepped inside, followed by Margaret Voss, carrying her polished black leather briefcase. Margaret wasted no time on polite greetings. She pulled out a stack of documents and placed them on the table right beside Sarah's grocery bag. "Luke Collins," Margaret said, her voice ringing like a church bell. "This is an emergency trespass order against you and your wife at the Fernwood Crescent property. And this is the formal notice of a lawsuit for forged signatures and fraudulent acquisition of property authority regarding the documents you coerced Mrs. Sarah Collins into signing yesterday afternoon." Luke's face drained from red to ghostly pale. He looked at Margaret, then at me. The glossy confidence he always wore began peeling away like cheap paint under harsh sunlight. "Dad, you hired a lawyer. This is a family matter." "Family." I stood up slowly. Years of construction work had given me a frame that still towered over him. Family doesn't throw their mother out of her own house with a grocery bag while her husband is away. Family doesn't use lies to steal the roof over the heads of the people who raised them. You erased the word family the moment you locked that kitchen door behind your mother. Mia began shouting about their rights, about documents already being filed. Margaret only smiled coldly. "The documents you're referring to," she said, calmly, "became worthless pieces of paper at 3 this morning, when William presented the original will and legally verified proof that the property cannot be transferred without both homeowners signing before a notary. She paused, letting the silence sink in. Good luck explaining that to the real estate licensing board this afternoon, Luke. It was a fatal blow. Luke was a real estate broker. Lose the license, and the glamorous world he worshipped would collapse overnight. He staggered backward. I stepped closer until only inches separated us. I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the sweat of fear. Luke, I said quietly so only the two of us could hear. I've built thousands of houses in my life, but I made one terrible mistake. I failed to build a decent heart inside my own son. I looked straight into his eyes. And now I'm going to do what any contractor must do when part of a structure is beyond repair. I'm removing it from the foundation of our lives. I pointed toward the door where Terrence stood with his arms crossed, his massive frame blocking the entire exit. Go, I said. And take your greed with you. Don't make me see your face on this property again. Not until you learn the true value of a single brick. Luke and Mia walked out silently under the watch of the court officer and Terrence's cold, contemptuous stare. When the white Audi disappeared behind the line of pine trees, the house finally fell quiet again. Sarah stepped beside me and took my hand. Her hand was still cold, but it was no longer trembling. It's over now, isn't it? She asked softly. Not yet, I replied, glancing toward Margaret's office. We have one final step to make sure this foundation can never be shaken again. We're going to clean up the rubble properly. I walked back to the table and picked up Sarah's grocery bag. I looked at the family photo inside, then carefully took it out and placed it back in its rightful place on the fireplace mantel. The empty plastic bag, I crushed it into a tight ball and tossed it straight into the trash. That was the only place it belonged. The legal battle was only beginning, but the battle inside my heart had already ended. Strangely, I felt lighter. Sometimes to save a house you have to tear down the room you once loved the most. I looked out at the porch. The maple leaves were still falling, but today they no longer carried the color of betrayal. They looked like fragments of a new beginning. A beginning where integrity would be the only building material allowed. The following Monday the sky over Niagara was gray and heavy, like a sheet of lead. But inside me everything felt clearer than ever. I put on my best contractor's outfit and tightened the laces of my work boots carefully. Today, I wasn't heading to a construction site. I was heading to Margaret Voss's office to perform the final renovation of my life's legacy. Margaret's office sat inside an old red brick building overlooking the river. Inside, the air smelled of aged paper and polished wood, the scent of order and truth. Margaret sat behind a large oak desk. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried a deep understanding. Good morning, William. Good morning, Sarah, she said, her voice gentle yet authoritative. I'm glad you came. We have quite a bit of work to do, to close this door permanently. I squeezed Sarah's hand. She looked different today. No longer the trembling woman standing in the kitchen that Thursday afternoon. She sat upright now, her eyes steady, as they focused on the stack of documents on the desk. I want to start immediately, I said, my voice low and steady. Luke's name. I want it removed from every legal document connected to us. Margaret nodded and slid a document across the desk. This is the amendment to your will and inheritance structure, she explained. If both of you sign here, Luke Collins will be formally disinherited from the Fernwood Crescent property and from all trust funds under your names. He will not receive a single dollar, nor even a single brick from this house after you pass away. I picked up the fountain pen. Its weight in my hand felt like the weight of a sledgehammer. For a moment, memories of Luke as a child flashed through my mind, the way he used to cling to my pant leg when I came home from work, the laughter when I pushed him on the backyard swing. But then the image of that cheap grocery bag, and the smug expression on his face while forcing his own mother out of the house, burned away every trace of hesitation. Luke's name was about to disappear from our legacy. When my pen drew a firm line across the space where his name once stood, it felt like I had just cut out a malignant tumor threatening the survival of my family. Are you certain about this, Sarah? I asked quietly, turning toward my wife. Sarah took the pen. She didn't look at me. Instead, she stared somewhere beyond Margaret, as if she could still see herself standing alone in that kitchen, isolated and frightened. I spent my entire life teaching children about kindness, she said softly, but clearly. I spent 30 years loving him unconditionally. But the moment he looked at me and said, Mom, take what you need and go somewhere else. I realized something. The son I loved had already died long ago. The man standing in front of me now is just a greedy stranger, and I have no obligation to leave my home to a stranger. She signed. Quickly, decisively. Margaret collected the documents and nodded with satisfaction. Good. Now about the police, she continued. I filed a formal complaint for fraud and attempted property seizure. In addition, the Real Estate Licensing Board has suspended Luke's license pending investigation. With the evidence we have, especially the forged signatures and the isolation of an elderly victim, there's a strong chance he'll face criminal charges. At the very least, he's looking at enormous fines and the end of his career. Right then, my phone began vibrating violently on the desk. Luke. Again. He had already called more than 20 times since early morning. I pressed the speaker button. Dad, you have to stop this. Luke's voice exploded through the phone, frantic and panicked. The real estate board is at my office. The police just left. Do you even know what you're doing? You're destroying my life. I looked at the phone, my face completely unchanged. No, Luke, I said calmly. You destroyed your own life the moment you handed your mother that grocery bag. I'm only doing what a contractor does, cleaning up the wreckage you created. I'm sorry, I was worried about our future. Mia said we needed capital to invest. Don't blame Mia, Luke. I cut him off, my voice cold as ice. You're the man in that family. You're the one who signed your name to those lies. You chose money over blood. Now you live with that choice. From now on, don't call this number again. My lawyer will deal with you. I hung up. Silence settled over Margaret's office. What I felt wasn't the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching someone suffer. It was the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman seeing a crooked structure finally straightened back into place. We left Margaret's office and stepped out onto the street. The air somehow felt cleaner. I took Sarah to the small bakery she loved most for coffee and pastries. We sat there watching people pass by outside the window. We didn't say much, but the connection between us felt stronger than it had in years. You know something, William, Sarah said softly, her hands covering mine across the wooden table. For the first time in many years, I feel truly safe in my own home. Even without Luke, I know our foundation is still there. I looked at her, the woman who had walked beside me for nearly 4 decades. You were always the one who kept that foundation from cracking, Sarah, I told her quietly. I just reinforced it. That afternoon we returned to Fernwood Crescent. Terence was already waiting for us with a wide grin. He had helped replace every lock in the house, heavy-duty ones this time, the kind only the 2 of us had keys to. We sat on the porch together, watching the red maple leaves fall into the yard. I glanced down the road leading to the house, the same road where Luke had once driven his polished car, with the intention of taking everything from us. Now the road was empty, and strangely peaceful. Everything had returned to its proper order. The traitor had been removed, and justice had been carried out in the only way it could be, painful but necessary. Sarah sat beside me, holding a warm cup of tea. She looked like a woman who had never once been forced to pack her belongings into a grocery bag and leave her own home. And that was the sweetest revenge I could ever give Luke. To show that no matter how many schemes he tried, he would never touch the soul of this house or the resolve of the father he once underestimated. I looked at the pile of dry maple leaves in the yard and smiled. Tomorrow, I said to Sarah, I'll clean up those leaves. We should make everything neat before winter comes, don't you think? At last, everything had settled. The foundation was strong again, and we, the true owners, were still here, steadier than ever. If you've listened this far, you're someone special because you've walked with me through the darkest hours of this story. Stay a moment longer and enjoy the brighter side of it all. Let me share the most valuable lesson this journey has given me. And don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in my place? Subscribe to Dad's Real Life Revenge so you won't miss the next journey of justice. The next morning I woke, as the first rays of autumn sunlight slipped through the curtains and landed softly on the bedsheets Sarah had just changed the day before. The room carried that gentle scent of sunshine and fabric softener, the smell of a home that's truly cared for with love. There were no harsh phone calls ringing anymore. No lingering sense of dread in every breath. I walked downstairs and found Sarah busy with the oven. The warm aroma of coffee cake filled the kitchen, drifting into every corner that had once been haunted by Luke's lies. I stepped out onto the porch and breathed in the crisp Niagara air. Terence had already stopped by early that morning. He had left a basket of fresh apples on the step with a small handwritten note. The foundation's set. Time to enjoy the house, old friend. I smiled, picked up a broom, and began sweeping the fallen maple leaves. Each stroke across the concrete felt strangely freeing. In construction, we call this stage final inspection. It's the moment after every mistake has been corrected, every weak material removed, and you finally step back to admire the structure that remains. Luke received his judgment not only from the law, but from his own conscience and career. The real estate board permanently revoked his license after Margaret presented undeniable evidence of forged property documents. I heard that Mia packed up and left their apartment in Hamilton as soon as their joint accounts were frozen for investigation. Those who sow the wind will reap the storm. And the storm they created had stripped away the glittering facade they built on the suffering of their own parents. But do you know what brought me the greatest satisfaction? It wasn't seeing Luke lose everything. It was looking into Sarah's eyes now. She sat on the porch in her rocking chair, holding a steaming cup of tea, quietly studying the rose bushes waiting to be trimmed. She looked like a woman who had never once been forced to pack her belongings and leave her own home. And that peace was the most precious thing I had taken back. At this point, I want to share a few words with you, the people who have listened to this story. Life, much like building a house, sometimes brings people who try to strip the structure from within. Sometimes they're strangers. But the most painful truth is that sometimes they're the very people you love the most. The advice of an old contractor like me is simple. Never let emotions blur your measuring line of integrity. Protect your foundation. No matter how much you love your children or relatives, always keep a solid legal fortress for yourself. Never sign anything you don't fully understand. And never allow anyone to isolate you from the people you trust. Silence is not weakness. When betrayal happens, our instinct is to shout. But a good builder stays quiet and studies the crack. Stay calm, gather your evidence, and seek professionals like Margaret Voss. Justice requires a clear mind, not a burning heart. Know when to tear something down. Some relationships rot all the way to the core. Trying to patch them only makes the entire structure collapse sooner. Sometimes the most humane revenge is simply cutting ties and living a life brighter than they ever imagined. I looked down at my hands, the calluses from 32 years of contracting work still there. They were proof that I had worked honestly for the home we built. Luke thought age had made me slow, but he forgot something. Experience teaches you exactly where the load-bearing points of a structure truly are. Evening settled over Niagara, the sunset painting the sky deep red. I set the broom aside and walked over to sit next to Sarah on the porch. We didn't talk about Luke. We didn't talk about lawsuits or frantic phone calls. Instead, we talked about what flowers we might plant along the walkway next spring. Order had been restored. The traitors had been removed from the blueprint of our lives. And the house on Fernwood Crescent would continue to stand, not because of bricks or concrete, but because it was protected by two people who understood the value of truth. Thank you for staying with me until the final moments of this journey. The story of the Collins family in Niagara ends here, but the message about dignity and protecting your home will remain. Never let anyone walk into your house and tell you that you don't belong there. You are the architect of your own life. Make sure the blueprint leaves no space for betrayal. I'm William, and this has been Dad's Real Life Revenge. Until next time, live kindly, but always carry a perfectly straight measuring line.